Did you know that your highlights are one of the best ways to feature your work? Recently, I talked about this in my weekly newsletter, The IG Insider, and how to introduce yourself to your audience through highlights. And by the way, if you're not subscribed to my newsletter, you need to be, because I always share targeted ways to reach your audience and stay on the pulse of Instagram strategies, newsletter marketing, and entrepreneurial mindset from a biblical perspective. You can join my newsletter several ways, simply by visiting my site, AuthenticOnlineMarketing.com, and I'll share more about one of our handy resources that come with newsletter sign up at the end of this podcast. Anyway, this episode is taken from a mentorship Zoom training, and you'll hear member Melissa Pickens ask what she should be featuring in her highlights. You'll come away with a good sense of what to leave in and what to remove for your Instagram highlights so that others can learn more about your offerings. And now, listen in.
Welcome to Authentic Online Marketing with Ruthie Gray. Growing awareness for your blog, podcast, book, or product involves more than dancing to reels and yelling, "Buy my thing." This show models quality over glamour so you can put your spin on your message and market in a way that feels authentic to you, because nobody wants to sound like an infomercial. And now, here's your host, Ruthie Gray.
One thing I need to completely redo is highlights. Any helps, suggestions, tips, etc. for setting them up. Previously, mine haven't had any real purpose. Okay, so what you want to do, Melissa, is look at your categories or buckets, whatever your topics are. That's what you can rearrange them as. So, for instance, you talk about suffering, you know, and I know that suffering, there are all kinds of subtopics, like maybe it's encouragement, or maybe you have a freebie that is connected to that for your newsletter, and you name that as one of them. Maybe there are a couple of book recommendations that you have. I feel like this is something that I don't really know all of your content. You know it better than I do. But if you could break it down into, different topics, and you probably have, then that is how you want to arrange your highlights. If you want to see an example, you can look at mine. I just recently cut a bunch of mine and we redid them. And basically for mine, it's, Instagram tips, podcast, newsletter, growth kit, things like that. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And I've been checking out some other authors and writers who are along the same lines. And because you're right, suffering is so general, but even that can be broken down. I know Mary DeMuth, she has like an actual section that's just for sexual abuse, and she pops in all sorts of things. And then she has, a section on, something else. And then her podcast and this, that, the other. So yeah, I think it would also help me to keep looking at others who do similar to what I do and similar message, and just kind of see what the differences are out there to keep jump starting my ideas and kind of how I need to shape mine up. But yeah, that does help. I hadn't even thought about adding like freebies and book recommendations. Yes, that it does definitely help me a lot. Yeah. It gets the thoughts rolling.
Well, and you can also look at what you've already written on your blog, take from that. And, you can always, especially, and this is something I tell everybody, wherever your content is, go there and break it down. Like take one section and break it into, so you make a carousel and you do point A, point B, point C, point D, or whatever. Then you take that and put it into a different kind of post. Like maybe you take one point and make it into a reel. And then maybe you take point number 2 and you just expand on that and make that just a static post or video or something like that. You can take one piece of content and repurpose it many different ways. So you don't have to think hard, but I would go through, if I were you, and look at everything that you've written and see, like, what are the categories? What are the things that I have talked about that just came naturally? And that may help you too.
Thank you.
Sure.
When considering what to put in highlights, think about your overarching topics or content pillars. Tips, topics, your podcast, courses, start here, membership, other offerings, testimonies. These are just a few ideas. And you can cycle through these every so often and clean them up, spruce up the highlight covers, but also make the content within those highlights fresh and relevant. If you've got content that's 25 frames back and 134 weeks old, it's probably time to cut that because most people will not watch 25 frames. 5 to 10 frames in your highlights is plenty. Remember that highlights come from your stories, so if you have a feed post you want to feature in highlights, send it to your stories first and then over to that highlight. And by the way, last week we talked about stories and what to share in stories, so while we're on the topic and before you go on with your day, you may want to catch that episode from last week. One of the most effective highlights I've done featured me holding a phone for a discovery call. I've gotten several bookings from that one highlight. But something we often overlook that was mentioned in this Zoom call is your newsletter freebie. You should be mentioning that freebie both in your feed and in stories because how will people know about it otherwise? I get newsletter signups every week simply by talking about my newsletter. And honestly, the newsletter is where the conversions happen. Your time needs to be spent on your newsletter over Instagram. Newsflash. If you go to my highlights at Authentic Online Marketing Pod, you'll see my newsletter mentioned. And if you tap into that newsletter, you'll see the different ways I talk about not only my freebie, but the value of my actual newsletter. You can deliver a great freebie, but have a not so great newsletter. So, in upcoming episodes, we'll be discussing how to do that better. In just a moment, you'll hear more about my newsletter freebie, the Follower Growth Kit, and how you can get it. And here's a tip. Next week, we're talking about ideas for newsletter freebies. A clean highlight look accents your Instagram platform without confusing followers. So go take a look at your highlights now and see what you may need to tweak. Thanks for listening this week, and remember to share your message your way in your own authentic voice. Hey there, it's Ruthie. I just want to let you know that we did a roundup of best practices on Instagram for 2022 that our people are seeing results from, and I want to offer it to you. It's called our Follower Growth Kit, where I walk you through 4 ways to gain followers, including how to come up with a fluid posting flow. We even have the transcript of the training if you're short on time, plus we've included 50 ideas to spark follower growth. It's in the show notes, but you can also go to AuthenticOnlineMarketing.com and you'll see it right at the top. Free Instagram Follower Growth Kit. So head on over and get your copy so you can get growing using tactics that work right now. You'll start receiving my weekly newsletter, the IG Insider, which contains Instagram marketing tips and information on our mentorship, upcoming trainings, and even free resources we think you'll love. Go grab it now.